Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. And today we have a very special topic, starting a series that'll be intertwined with another series we'll touch on more next week. But today we'll go backwards in time first to kind of give ourselves a couple placeholders, give us some historical precedents to go into today's topic. But back in 2010, and then again in 2022 or 2022, the Panthers had crowded quarterback rooms. 2010, Matt Moore was going to be the starter. He showed signs of being Jake Delhomme 2.0 at the end of 2009. And me as a Panthers fan, I was excited about that. I was like, okay, we got Delhomme 2.0. We still have Steve Smith. Like we're going to be a good team. That year we drafted Jimmy Clausen in the second round. We traded a future, I believe, second round pick to move up and take Armani Edwards in the third round with the New England Patriots. And then we took Tony Pike out of Cincinnati that year, along with a couple other acquisitions outside of the draft. And so what ended up happening, Matt Moore didn't pan out. Jimmy Clausen didn't work. Some of these other younger guys saw some playing time, and we went 2-14, had the first overall pick, and ended up selecting Cam Newton, which was the, I would say, pivot point for the franchise. We actually were on the up and up after that, which was great. Fast forward to 2022, and we have a similar setup. That offseason, you trade for Baker Mayfield because the Sam Darnold experiment really didn't work. You had PJ Walker in the building. Matt Corral had just been drafted. There was just a lot of snaps to share between players that didn't have a lot of time in a new system. And it felt rushed and was not put together well. And the result was the reason why Matt Rule got fired in season and Steve Wilks was able to kind of rectify and milk out the rest of the talent that was on that roster to get to 7-10 and put us in a seat to where we had a shot at the playoffs. So looking back at that, there's a couple teams this year that have those crowded quarterback rooms. And with those lenses, I want to see, okay, are these teams about to bottom out? Are we about to see a couple of these teams with top 5 picks? Or are some of these teams going to be able to piece it together one way or another and fight to stay around 500? And so I want to kind of kick this off to you. Who are some of those teams that kind of embody those two genres of crowded quarterback rooms?
We brought up those two seasons, and as a Panthers fan, tough to watch. 2010 was really, really, really tough to watch. And then 2022, it was interesting, at least, once Steve Wilks came in. But we lost that game to the Buccaneers where J.C. Horn didn't play and Tom Brady just shredded us. And after that, it was whatever. But some of the teams like that this year are, unsurprisingly, teams that picked in the top 10, or most of these teams picked in the top 10, right? Number one, the Titans with Cam Ward. That's not really a crowded room because we know Cam Ward's going to be the starter, right? We know that it's not Will Levis. That experiment has mostly flamed out. But then the pick after that, or it was originally after that, they traded with the Jaguars, but the Cleveland Browns. If you want to talk crowded QB rooms, this is probably the most crowded QB room we've seen in quite some time. That team in 2022 with the Panthers, you mentioned Baker, who he was a starter the year before, just traded. Sam Darnold, who was the Panthers starter. PJ Walker was the XFL MVP, if I recall correctly, and he had played for Matt Rule, so there was the familiarity there. And Matt Corral was drafted kind of as Baker leverage. But then you go to this Browns team. That's 4 QBs, by the way. This Browns team has 5, and you can't really count Deshaun Watson because even if he were healthy, he's probably not going to play at all this year. Like they've taken the sunk cost. It's over. Like they just have to sit him and then try to cut him next year or keep him and deal with the money. But that's whatever. So half a quarterback with Deshaun Watson, but they traded for Kenny Pickett in the offseason. They signed Joe Flacco before the draft. I want to say like a week before. And then they drafted Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round and Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round. So they have 4.5, we'll say 5 QBs. And one of the big themes about that 2022 Panthers team was in training camp, it was like, all right, who's getting the first team reps today? I know that was like a whole big deal between the beat writers. It was like, who can say who got the first team reps today before everybody else? And you get a lot of likes and a lot of retweets and stuff like that. Similar situation with the Browns, right? all of the QBs in their training camp, other than maybe Joe Flacco, right? Because he doesn't have to participate. We know what he can do. He has familiarity with Kevin Stefanski, but the other guys, Pickett, Gabriel, Shador Sanders, you gave up real assets for him. You traded for Kenny Pickett. Dylan Gabriel was a day 2 pick. And then even though Sanders was a 5th round pick, they traded up in the draft for him. So they gave real assets, real stuff to get these guys. How are you going to distribute those reps? And that comes even more into question when you think Joe Flacco is probably the best option right now, right? So he has to have some number 1 QB reps with the number 1 receivers, number 1 O-line, that sort of thing. How are you going to build repetition and familiarity with every QB on the roster? You can't do that. And that's like the first cardinal sin of having a QB room with so many mouths to feed. There's only enough throws to be thrown around in a practice.
There's only so many hours in the day, and when you start spreading those first team reps across multiple guys, that the offense is going to look a little bit different. And I will say, and I don't know if I use this comparison with Shador Sanders with our quarterback evaluation around the draft, but he reminded me of a guy like Kenny Pickett. I didn't see the arm talent necessarily push the ball down the field. So the fact that you have 2 guys that are similar in that respect, that's good. You have some common ground there, but Dylan Gabriel and Joe Flacco are going to give you a little bit different flavoring in terms of Flacco's ability to operate from the pocket. And Dylan Gabriel might be able to add like an element of some of the bootleg play action stuff we've seen from Kevin Stefanski of old. So just the different wrinkles that could be there. But that means, like you said, guys are taking reps with these first team guys. They're trying to adjust to different quarterbacks throwing them the ball. And I think it just adds more confusion and chaos, and it doesn't really give this team any synergy. From reports from the Cleveland Browns media heading into kind of training camp and some of these OTAs and off-season workouts, it seems like Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel are the 1 and 2 right now. We'll see if that holds, but if that's kind of how they're splitting it, those 2 guys should mainly get the first team reps. But again, like you said, between Joe Flacco's experience and the media hype around Shador Sanders, you just wonder if those guys will end up creeping into that, especially since I don't think any of those 2 quarterbacks I mentioned really blow you away.
Yeah, especially with Gabriel. I know Pickett and Shador Sanders probably don't have, let's say they have C- NFL arms. I think they meet the threshold. I think Gabriel's in that same boat, and he brings a little bit less size. He at Oregon didn't really attempt layered throws or downfield throws that weren't play action. He was very, very conservative. I think his air yards were quite low as well. And then when you look at what Bo Nix did in that offense, Bo Nix did push the ball downfield. That's how he's a first-round pick. You can see the difference between those guys, even though it's kind of like a Mickey Mouse or a fake offense. And then when you take into account that you have 4 different throwers, for the receivers, that's okay, 4 different people that have different velocity on the ball, different ball placement. How do they move around in the pocket, and when do they release? The receivers have to learn that for 4 different people. Then take it from the quarterback's perspective. Imagine you're Shador Sanders right now, taking reps with the 4s or the 3s or something. Well, what if today's Thursday? What if tomorrow on Friday he gets the 1s reps? So now he needs to know the receivers on the 1s, where do they like the ball placed? Where does David Njoku like the ball? Does he want to inside leverage on this type of route? What is it? And like when you have to learn so much of that stuff instead of just kind of focusing on the playbook, focusing on the guys you are working with the most, that's just information overload for a lot of these guys. And for somebody, I can't imagine that they'll keep all 4 QBs because that's just poor roster management, poor end season roster management. For somebody, let's say Sanders is the guy that's on the guy who's going to get cut from that group, to learn all of that amount of stuff and then not make the team. That's just a lot. Like, I don't understand the process of having this many QBs in the room. I know you want to have enough darts to throw. You have to solve that QB room. But in both of the examples we talked about with the Panthers, the QB room didn't get solved. Cam Newton was the first overall pick the next year. While the Panthers earned, was it the 9th or 10th pick? And then we traded up to go get Bryce. The reason we traded up to get him is none of those QBs were the answer, right? None of those QBs remained on the roster even in 2023 because we brought Andy Dalton in as the backup. So when you have this conglomerate, this plethora of different QBs, none of whom I think blow you away, it's never going to turn out well. And as far as like, can you see this team picking in the top 5 again? Yes, I can. They didn't like their O-line still isn't very good. They still didn't add that number 1 receiver, which they could have in Travis Hunter in the draft. It's this experiment with the Browns that's like spurred on by the failed Deshaun Watson experiment, just keeping them in. It's not even purgatory. They're like in QB hell over the past couple of years.
And it's shocking because you look at what Baker Mayfield's now doing in Tampa Bay, and you're wondering that, like, obviously there were some maturity issues. And I think him getting cut from the Browns, playing with the Rams, going through the Panthers experience, landing in Tampa Bay definitely helped him grow as a person. So I think that helped his arc as a player. But the fact that you let a guy out of the building who's making that $30 to $40 million that would have been feasible to work around the roster you had and would have tied you to this fully guaranteed contract for a player that costs you 3 first-round picks to acquire. It's just, obviously hindsight's 2020, but you just keep looking at that decision and they're making moves that compound it even more. And it just feels like Mickey Loomis down in New Orleans. Like, that's really the vibes you get from Andrew Berry and the Browns, is because their back is against the wall and now they're trying to clean house. And the way they're doing it, like you talked about, the Panthers in 2011 had the first overall pick because the team was that bad. And because of the disaster that quarterback room was in 2022, they moved up to the first overall pick to get their guy. They were done playing this quarterback carousel. So you just wonder if this is going to spell the end of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, especially if, like you said, this lends itself to another top 5 pick for the team.
When you said they let Baker out, they didn't let him out. They like pushed him out of the city. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you remember, like the hit pieces they were writing about him were just like gross. They're like,
well,
he doesn't know
Odell
how to.
Beckham's dad and him getting involved.
The whole thing with like Browns media members, like I'm sure Baker had a level of immaturity, like the stuff they were saying about him, like not practicing, not knowing the playbook, all that kind of stuff. That can't be 100% true, especially when all this stuff was coming out after they traded for Deshaun Watson, which really doesn't make sense because you would want to continue to prop up his trade value. I don't know. But with the Browns, I think both of us expect that this is a team that might bottom out, even with their defensive front being strong. I don't think they have enough on that side of the ball to be the, 2023 unit where they were just otherworldly the first year of Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. So I think we both expect a high pick in next year's draft. Even if they don't have the number 1 pick, somewhere in 2 or 3 should be a spot to get them a potential franchise QB, because there's going to be quite a few QBs next year. And if you recall, they have the Jags pick as well. And I don't think the Jags are going to be world beaters. I think they'll end up with a top 16 pick. So that'll be another piece that they can move around and try to get a QB. But then the team after them, the Giants, they did all that moving around to get their QB this year.
They moved around a little bit, but they stayed put at 3. They took the best player available. They didn't move down. Like you said, like the gap between Travis Hunter and Mason Graham may be huge, because Mason Graham could be a great run defender. He could be a great interior fit for that defensive line, allowing Myles Garrett to do what he does best on the outside. But the pair of true wide receiver 1 next to Jerry Jeudy, who you just extended, makes a lot of sense, especially when you have all this turmoil at quarterback. At least give them reliable weapons to get the ball to. And in the case of the Giants, what I loved is they go out and they get Abdul Carter. They make something that was a strength on their team, like borderline, like we're talking elite status. And I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I'm talking about a rookie, but when you have a guy that comps to a Micah Parsons and Abdul Carter, wore the 11 at Penn State, like that, just the echoing chambers are very loud here. And then you have Brian Burns, you have Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau was coming on at the end of last year. You have some of the linebackers that they've drafted and developed over the past couple of years, paired with their secondary that they built through the draft as well. And you start to like kind of what you're seeing, to the point where I think, based on what their defensive line is going to be able to do, it's going to force teams to lean either on the run just to prevent themselves from dropping back against that pass rush, or finding like quick game elements that allow them to move the ball down the field without taking sacks, because that is going to be the name of the game for the New York Giants.
Yeah, for sure. Of all the teams,
I just got off track. I talked about their defense and what we're talking about quarterbacks, but that's just when we talk about the draft process, that the Giants approached it the right way, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think out of all these teams that we're going to talk about, you see the path the most probably with the Giants because of that defense, right? The errors of the Browns don't necessarily match up with the Giants because the Giants stuck and picked Abdul Carter, right? I think if the Browns stuck and picked Travis Hunter, I would have a much more favorable grade on their offseason or grade on their draft. But the Giants, while I'm not a huge fan of Jackson Dart, he was like 70th on my board. And they take him at 25, I believe was the pick, or 26. At least getting Carter makes it a lot better, right? And then it's not just going and getting Jackson Dart. In the offseason, they get Russell Wilson, who was a starter last year for the second half of the year. Jameis Winston became a starter with the Browns, and they're keeping Tommy DeVito, who's like a fan favorite, local legend, more than a superstar QB. But now you don't have to play Jackson Dart early. When we're talking about the Browns, I think you expect the at least one of the rookies to play at some point this year because don't think you're going to get stellar play out of Flacco and Pickett. With the Giants, I don't think that 2025 Russ, or even Jameis Winston can give you high level QB play. But I think with the defense that they have and that they've been constructing, I think they can give you good enough play to give you complimentary football, especially if Andrew Thomas comes back healthy.
Absolutely. The offensive infrastructure is there for the quarterback who ends up starting. And what's interesting is you brought up Russ and Jameis Winston, who started last year. I don't think that there's going to be a huge split on first team reps. I think Russell Wilson will be the de facto starter. Winston has played backup to a lot of quarterbacks for the past half decade. He has always been in favor and support of the starting quarterback where he's been. And just having that camaraderie in the quarterback room, I think, is really healthy. And if Jackson Dart isn't the epitome of what Brian Daboll is looking for in quarterback in terms of like prototype, he loves his big athletic quarterbacks. And we saw it with Josh Allen in Buffalo. We saw it with Daniel Jones in New York, a huge reason and selling point of why he ended up landing in New York. And now he drafts Jackson Dart. So whether or not he pans out, whether or not he develops, I think exactly what you talked about, where he gets to sit behind these two veterans and not be forced into a starting role, is really healthy for a guy that you want to potentially see be the starter. And so with the Giants, why I put a lot of emphasis on how they approach the draft and making a strength something stronger for them. I think if they can lean on the defense this year and they can find themselves around 500, at that point, it's like, okay, do you feel confident about the development of Jackson Dart, or do you want to take another stab at a quarterback in next year's draft where you have a lot of pieces? We've seen teams over the past couple of years. We saw with the Vikings and the Broncos last year with J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix. Like, maybe you get your guy of that caliber then to compete with Jackson Dart to where you're trending in the right direction. But there's a lot of ifs around this team. And like what we saw with the Panthers in 2010 and 2022, this can all fall apart a lot faster than we realize at the surface level.
Yeah, and the Giants are in a rough spot division-wise, right? Obviously, the Eagles just won the Super Bowl. Washington just played them in the NFC Championship. I think we can agree Dallas has a better roster and better QB right now than the Giants. So they're kind of bottom of the totem pole by a good margin in their division. But I agree with you. They're building the right way. And you had a good phrase to describe their quarterback competition or their QB room. It's healthy. And that's not something that we can really talk about with the Browns. The team we'll talk about after the Giants. A little bit with the Colts. I think their room is healthier than like the Browns or the Saints. But there's a structure in place. Dart was never meant to be the week one starter. That's why they brought in two veterans in free agency, because if you bring in like just Russ and Dart starts blowing him out of the water in training camp, it's like, all right, we have to start Dart even though he might not be ready. But let's say he smokes Russ in training camp, but Jameis is still there. He's played before. He knows how to start in multiple systems. He can be the starter. That's why they brought two in. And I think it's going to help Jackson Dart, who isn't a like 100% foolproof prospect or bulletproof prospect, being able to sit and develop behind two different style QBs, taking what each of those guys do best and molding it to his own game. I think that's going to pay off in the long run.
It should. And I'm rooting for Jackson Dart. He's a cool dude, decent amount of aura. And what's interesting is I think he fits in really well, similar to Tommy DeVito, in that actual city. But what I love is that like Winston and Russ, you're going to get so many meme-worthy moments the entire year. And I think that makes the Giants team fun. Like you have Malik Neighbors, you have Andrew Thomas, you have Tyrone Tracy, you just drafted. You just drafted, and I'm blanking out on the steamroller that they just drafted.
Your guy,
Cam Scatterbo.
Yeah.
It took me a second. I was like, we just went over draft stuff, and I'm blanking on him. But that kind of element where I be a fun group to watch and monitor, even though they probably are going to be a bottom dweller in the NFC East. Now, granted, I think the NFC East is going to be very similar to the NFC North, where they could send 2 or 3 teams to the playoffs, and it's really just going to depend on health and what happens down the stretch. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We just talked about the Giants, which has like this aura about the quarterback room. And I think that the quarterback room with the least aura, at least out of the quarterback rooms we're talking about, is the New Orleans Saints. You're talking about Tyler Shuck, who looks to be like your white suburban just dude out in the suburbs. And then you have Spencer Rattler, who, like, I don't want to get on him, but he acts like he's something he's not. Has a little bit more swagger than maybe he puts out on the field. And then you have Jake Haener, who's their pretty boy. So just like between that, like, I don't know if you have a boy band or a quarterback room, but just not a lot of good emotions when you're looking at this.
Not a lot of good play on the football field either when you're looking at this group, right? Well, I don't even know where to start. Let's start with Haener, I guess, because he doesn't play a ton. I think he's actually a model, if I'm not mistaken. Like that's like his side
so that's
gig.
why they
like he does like
okay.
like posters and commercials like for malls and stuff. Yeah, Spencer Rattler didn't inspire a lot of confidence last year. He was somebody that I thought improved in his 2 years at South Carolina, but he didn't coalesce with the Saints roster. It's hard for any QB, I think, to have been good on that roster last year. Give Derek Carr credit. I'm not a Derek Carr fan, but at least he minimized mistakes there. And then Tyler Shuck, after Derek Carr's kind of sudden retirement, they were lucky to have drafted Derek Carr. Same age, same skill set, same output on the field, they hope. But I think Tyler Shuck's going to produce quite a bit more negative plays than maybe not negative in terms of like -6 EPA, but a lot of meme-worthy plays like Will Levis, and a lot of I think he gets rattled pretty easily. Ironically, Spencer Rattler, I think, is a bit better with the ball in his hands and staying in the pocket. But Shuck doesn't inspire confidence, and it seems like he's going to be the guy. I think he's taking the number 1 reps from everything I've heard. All like Rappaport and Schefter have said, now that Carr's out, he has the path to being the starter, and he should be. He was, the 40th overall pick or something like that. But I've spoken at length about my concerns with Tyler Shuck. I think he's kind of tapped out in terms of potential. And given the rest of the Saints roster and how poor it is, I think they're the worst roster in football right now. It's going to take a miracle for any of these 3 quarterbacks to put something good on the field this season, in my opinion, at least.
Well, when you talk about rosters, and at least we're looking at least the teams we're talking about, I feel like the Browns' offensive line is actually worse than what the Saints are putting out. I feel like the Saints have 2 tackles, or at least starting caliber tackles. The interior's somewhat fine. But at the end of the day, we've seen long injury histories for not only the offensive skill positions and Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but then guys across the offensive line to where, okay, if some of those guys get hurt and Tyler Shuck gets pressured, that's when the mistakes are going to mount. And at least with Derek Carr, you had somebody who was able to chuck it at the feet of a running back in the flat, throw the ball away, like avoid it becoming worse than what it really is. And where you talked about negative plays, those negative like 6-point plays, I don't know. Like Will Levis had a couple of those last year, and I think Tyler Shuck has the ability to do the same thing, and that's scary and risky because so much of playing quarterback isn't just making the big explosive play. It's not making the mistake. And like so much of that is like why Jimmy G and Brock Purdy got the money they did in San Francisco is they were able to operate the system, make some of those big plays, and just not make the mistakes. And so to me, looking at Tyler Shuck, like I think he's just going to make 2 or 3 boneheaded mistakes each as a defense is able to rattle him. And to Spencer Rattler, like where I was talking about earlier, like he acts kind of like somebody he isn't, doesn't have the physical capabilities of being a great athlete. Like, he's not Kyler Murray. And he stands back in the pocket like he has the ability to escape pressure, and he doesn't. So I think if he learns how to operate in structure, his arm talent and I think ability to deliver the ball is special at times. But this isn't a quarterback room that gives you much hope as a team. And so, like you said, when you look at the construct of the roster, you look at the coaching staff, this could be a team with a top 5 pick. And I think they would definitely benefit from adding another quarterback next year. It's just a shame that you spend like pick 40 to end up getting into the top 5. Like, you shouldn't be drafting a quarterback like that, because this goes back to that 2010 example, like wasting a 2nd round pick on Jimmy Clausen. Like, you have so many holes across your roster, and obviously you're hoping Tyler Shuck works out, but between the injury history and how he looks when he's pressured, like, those are 2 things to me that go, this isn't going to be a guy that transcends at the next level. Like, at best, he's an average quarterback that is able to be a floor raiser, not a ceiling raiser.
Yeah, not a lot of feel or pocket presence in this quarterback room, I would say. The Will Levis comparison, I think, is really interesting because they don't play super similar, right? They have the meme, the really, really bad play highlights. But I think if you took Levis and scaled him down a little bit on arm talent, a little bit on athleticism, and you keep a lot of the core stuff like feel, ability to get out of the pocket, that kind of thing, throwing on the run, a little bit similar to Tyler Shuck there. And then when you look at the rest of the roster, not a lot of confidence. What I will say, though, is similar to what the Giants did. They didn't force Tyler Shuck at pick 9 or whoever would have been the QB at pick 9 for the Saints. Took a tackle, hoping to build a young, stable foundation on the offensive line to book in the middle. And then eventually, maybe if Archie Manning declares next year, I don't think he will, because he'll make more money in college just because his name's Archie Manning and he plays at Texas. But if he declares, if any of the other early guys end up in that range for the Saints, I think they would be more than welcome to look at a potential franchise guy like that, because the Saints really haven't been picking in that top 5 group. They usually, in the post Drew Brees era, they hover like around 8 to 14, like in that range, because they're never good enough to make the playoffs. But they have the old stalwart players on the team like Cam Jordan, who will always give a fight. Last year, he didn't put up a fight. He was pretty poor last year. But in years past, that's how it's been. So they haven't had that opportunity yet. And I think that's part of the reason why they've been stuck in this salary cap situation. It's because they can't reset. They don't have a franchise quarterback. They haven't been able to get one. So if they do end up picking, let's say 4th overall, 3rd overall, and get like Drew Aller from Penn State, you talked about the Josh Allen and Daniel Jones comparisons. That's kind of his mold. Maybe that can be their franchise guy and get them out of this. But until then, I just don't really see it. My hope as a Panthers fan is that Shuck gives them 4 or 5 wins and like nets them the 8th pick or something to where they can't do something like that. But we'll have to see.
That would be poetry emotion. I would love that as a Panthers fan to see that kind of agony where you put yourself out of the position to actually get a true game changer. But to your point about the Saints, their cap space situation looks great in a couple of years. Like, a lot of these contracts that they've been tied to from that Drew Brees, Sean Payton era, they're finally done. That their sins are almost atoned for. So I think if you're able to somehow push through this year and at least build a solid foundation with the pieces on the roster, I think that puts yourself in a good position, like you said, of taking that franchise cornerstone in next year's draft. We have one more team that kind of fits the criteria. And I think with this team, they, similar to the Giants, have a plan of how this is going to work out. And I appreciate that plan a little bit more because depending on who wins the starting job, depending on if there's an injury, it feels like there's a seamless transition, not only from the first and second option, but also the third option that was just drafted this past year. So the team I'm talking about, the Indianapolis Colts, Shane Steichen has put together a really good offensive unit on paper. Same on the defensive side. You're starting to get some pieces to where this looks like a complete team. You've been hovering around 500 the past couple of years. It all comes down to the quarterback position. And so Anthony Richardson, you spend a top 5 pick on a couple of years ago, and he hasn't really lived up to the draft billing, despite being an incredible athlete. Then you bring in Daniel Jones this year, didn't work out in New York. The ecosystem in New York was not as good as Indianapolis's. So it will be very interesting to see that maybe he turns up a little bit. Maybe he has like a Sam Darnold arc where he looks better in a more conducive environment. And then they just drafted Riley Leonard, who that's kind of his billing type. He's a bigger, more physical quarterback that can run the ball. And that, I think, lends itself to what they're going to be installing in terms of an offensive system and then the reps. I think it will start with Anthony Richardson, but if anybody's going to overtake him, it's Daniel Jones. So this is really just a battle between two guys. But as the old saying goes, and really, I would say, and I should have started the episode off with this, when you have two quarterbacks, you have none, is really kind of where the saying, the expression that kind of spun the idea of this episode.
I think that this is the fairest QB battle possible for Anthony Richardson. What I mean by that is, if you can't beat Daniel Jones for that QB1 spot in camp, you don't deserve to be an NFL starter. I think that's pretty clear up to this point. You brought up maybe a better environment for Daniel Jones. Let me pose this for you. Who do you think is the better play caller? Brian Dable or Shane Steichen? Like what?
Steichen.
And it's not only Steichen, but I think Steichen's worked with more of a variety of QBs, different types of QB. So he knows how to draw the best out of each QB. I think that can help a lot. And then drafting Riley Leonard, I think, is in the 5th or 6th round. If you go back and watch any of his games at Notre Dame, but in particular the national championship against Ohio State, which they lost, it shouldn't have been close. Like Ohio State fielded, in my opinion, probably the best, or at least a top 3 best roster in the college football playoff era. Like they were stacked everywhere. And Riley Leonard is who kept them in that game. It was like a 15 or 16 play first drive. And almost all the plays he ran the ball down the field and got them their first touchdown. But with that in mind, you take that kind of player, put him in a QB room with Daniel Jones, put that in a QB room with Anthony Richardson. Even if somebody gets hurt, like you're talking about, even if, let's say, Riley Leonard shocks the world and wins the starting job, you don't have to change the structure of the offense because they can play similar. All 3 of those guys play similar. The drop-off is, well, Anthony Richardson is a much better athlete, right? So you're probably not going to be able to attempt 70-yard play action passes, but those aren't real plays anyway, right? You're just not going to get like the special, he's falling backwards and he'll flick his wrist and it'll go on a frozen rope 50 yards. You won't be able to get that with Daniel Jones or Riley Leonard, but you'll be able to do the same kind of thing. They drafted Tyler Warren in the first round, a tight end who, what was his claim to fame in college? He's this multiple player that can do everything, right? So if you get him involved in the running game, where he's a strong physical blocker, he can help out in that QB run game as well. There's a plan in place here, like we're talking about with the Giants. And while the Giants, it might be, all right, we're going to roll with Russ until Dart starts progressing. The plan here is, even if we end up rolling with Riley Leonard, we're doing the same thing. And all the receivers are going to be used to how the structure of the offense works. The O-line isn't going to have to deploy 3 different blocking schemes depending on who the quarterback is. It's very uniform, it's very succinct. And I think for a coach and a general manager, for that matter, that are pretty much on their last legs, I think we can both agree that they're on the hot seat this year if they don't make the playoffs. I think this is like the best thing they could have done to give themselves a chance to go out and win games this year. Because like you're saying, this has been a 9-8, 8-9 roster the past 2 years, respectively. I think they upgraded the secondary. I think the defensive line is still decently strong. This can be a team that, if they get good quarterback play, can fight for one of those wild cards, can maybe fight for the AFC South if we see the Texans struggle again. So I really like what the Colts are doing as far as the system they're attempting, like the structure they're attempting. To me, it's just like they haven't found their franchise QB yet. Maybe this pushes Anthony Richardson into being that, but we will have to see.
This is year 3. We saw Bryce Young kind of turn up at the end of year 2, and we're hoping that year 3 is that big jump for him. I think Colts fans are hoping the same thing for Anthony Richardson. And what I will say, and for any of those who are watching on YouTube, we have a graph of kind of design runs. I think Shane Steichen, it's in his best interest to really build this around just running the ball. You have Jonathan Taylor, who you just paid. Like you said, you just drafted Tyler Warren. You're trusting some young guys that you drafted over the past couple of years on your interior offensive line. You trust your tackle play. You love the wide receivers you have on the outside. Like run the ball, and then use that to then have RPO and play action looks. because I think that is where a guy like Anthony Richardson and even Daniel Jones will thrive, is they'll be in so much of a rhythm that they're just throwing to an open guy. And so the accuracy issues, I think, go down a little bit more. And we saw some of that last year. We saw Anthony Richardson, when he threw deep, he wasn't actually that inaccurate. It's a lot of the short and intermediate game, and that's what he needs to focus on cleaning up. Because if you can be a little bit more accurate there and can play in structure, that's what's going to help your offense take that next jump. Because there were several games last year. They were in Denver, were in a position to win that game, and they kind of threw it away. And part of that was Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen. And you have to clean that up going into year 3 and win those close games. And if they're able to do that with Anthony Richardson, great. That means you can build off that. If not, hopefully you're able to find those wins with Daniel Jones and sneak into the playoffs. And I think if you're able to do that in the AFC with a lot of good teams, that says a lot. I don't know if that means that they're going to have a super long leash and they're going to have to still find a long-term solution at quarterback. But I think the Colts have set themselves up probably the best out of the 4 teams we've talked about. However, and I want to kind of stage it like this, out of the 4 teams we've talked about, with the Browns with Kevin Stefanski, the Saints with Kellen Moore, the Giants with Brian Dable, and now the Colts here with Shane Steichen, whose seat is the hottest right now and whose is probably the least hottest?
We'll start with the coldest. I think Kellen Moore probably has the most leash, right? He's a first-year head coach. He just conducted an offensive unit that absolutely destroyed Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So I think he has some street cred. I think the Saints know that the roster is not good. So I think he has at least another year. They could go 0-17, and I think he'd still be the coach.
Wow.
We saw it with the Browns. As far as whose seat is the hottest, I think all three coaches can easily be fired this year. I'm trying to piece together in my mind. I want to say that it's Dable, but I don't think he's going to get fired I think Stefanski's going to get fired first just because that team isn't good. But I really think that this going back into the first round and getting Jackson Dart, getting 2 QBs in free agency, I think this is a final gambit of a coach that's probably, and a GM for that matter, and Joe Shane, that have probably overstayed their welcome in New York. I think you probably should have done the reset this year if you were going to do it at all. So I would say probably Dable, especially because if they start out 0-4 or something like that, the plan goes out the window, right? Jackson Dart has to be the starter from that point on, just to see what you have in him. And if you have anything in him, that's when Brian Dable can be like, hey, we have something here. You got to let us continue to grow this QB. So I think if I had to rank order them in terms of from hottest to coldest seat, I guess I would start with Dable. I would go, I'll go Dable, Stefanski, Steichen, Kellen Moore. And I really think that Steichen and Stefanski are pretty much even, but I think the Browns are going to be so bad that Stefanski is going to get fired. I don't see a path where he stays. Maybe the owners understands oh, this isn't your fault 100%. We'll give you another year or something. But I think if the Colts don't make the playoffs, Steichen's gone. There's no if we don't see Jackson Dart do anything good, I think Dable's gone. And yeah, I think Stefanski's he's just screwed. He's been put in the worst possible position over the last 5 or however long Deshaun Watson's been there. I think he's just run out of luck of sticking around. So what did I say? Dable, Stefanski, Steichen, and Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore's safe. I'll just say that.
That's fair. Frank Reich was obviously a retread, but getting fired in season as your first year, I think there are elements to where that could happen for Kellen Moore if things go sideways very quickly.
What I'll say is Frank Reich was not good his last year and a half in Indianapolis. Kellen Moore, by all accounts, was very good in Philadelphia. So it's it's an interesting thing. Because when Frank Reich got fired, the Colts instantly got better with Jeff Saturday as the interim head coach. There was,
I don't know,
he understood
better is
their O-line got much better. Second that happened. And I think you and I both understood because we were Panthers fans. There was a reason Frank Reich got fired. We weren't thrilled about him being the new head coach. As far as that goes, I think Kellen Moore is a bit safer there. But how do you rank the other 3?
Yeah, and Kellen Moore, the only reason I say that is because we saw the offense last year. It was better than what it was in 2023, but it did not remind me anything of what we saw with Shane Steichen. And to
Yeah.
me, that just shows a lack of sequencing or vision. And you said it earlier with Shane Steichen and kind of talking about Brian Dable and some of these other play callers. He lit it up with Justin Herbert. He lit it up with Jalen Hurts. And if he can finally unlock Anthony Richardson in year 3 as the developmental project, I think he would be arguably put up with some of the better quarterback whisperers in the league right now. So he is right there with Kellen Moore in terms of being close to being not on the hot seat. It really does depend on the winning record. And it'll suck if you're like 9-8, 10-7, and you just miss the playoffs. I think 10-7 and just missing the playoffs may get you another year, but he's got a shorter leash. I wouldn't say the thinnest ice. I think he coaches through the year. Yeah. For me, it's like Kevin Stefanski and Brian Dable. Depending on how things go for their respective teams, they could get fired in season. I could really see it with Stefanski. Like, this is, at some point, you just have to sleep in the bed you made. And the way you approach the quarterback room this offseason didn't make any sense. And the way you went about kind of rebuilding the roster, like, your offensive line is devoid of talent and you're spending 2 picks on running backs. Like, don't get me wrong, like, good players, but like they still need people blocking in front of them. And so it's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I didn't see the vision. And for me, Stefanski is going to be the guy that's on the hottest seat. And then Dable's probably right after him. I think with Dable, you definitely have an identity of what you're trying to do. I just don't know if it's going to amount to anything because we haven't really seen a good offense from them. And the pieces on there aren't necessarily like making me think this is going to be an above average unit. At best, you're an average offense. And that, I think, says a lot about a coach that has taken over the play calling duties. It's like, this is really fallen on your shoulders just as much as Joe Shine's shoulders for putting the roster together and allowing guys like Xavier McKinney and Saquon Barkley to leave the building.
Yeah, and back to the Browns, it's like, I heard this on the Athletic Football Show maybe a couple episodes ago. They were it's like their biggest questions about every team series or something like that. Do you know how many players that the Browns have under contract going into next year's offseason? So in 2026 free agency, do you know how many players?
Is it like 20 or less? Like,
it's 19. You know, like most teams have like 40 because you're supposed to field 90 in the offseason. 19 is like incredibly low. So as far as Stefanski goes, like a good portion of it is his fault, right? He didn't elevate the play of a lot of the players there. But he's also been put in like by far the worst position out of all of these coaches. So I think we're on the same page that it's Dable, Stefanski are like the two probably going to get fired guys. Steichen, if he misses playoffs, I think he's out. And then I think we both think that Kellen Moore is safer here. As far as other crowded QB rooms go, there are a couple more. I think the Steelers, it's not really a crowd, but it's more like, is there a starter in their QB room? Because it's Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, and they draft Will Howard in the 6th round, I believe. National championship winning quarterback, but I don't think he's a superstar NFL prospect by any means. So like this, Rodgers, I think, has to go there eventually. If Rodgers is going to play again at all, I think it'll be with the Steelers this year.
It's either going to be him or Kirk Cousins in Pittsburgh. I find it hard to believe Mason Rudolph's going to be the week 1 starter. Will Howard, maybe he's on the come up, and he's a guy. We saw him kind of work some wonders with Jeremiah Smith, and he's got DK Metcalf in Pittsburgh, the light version or an off-brand version, so to speak. And so I could see like layers on how that quarterback room works out. Obviously has not been solved since Big Ben's retirement, and they still have a winning record. So like at the end of the day, it's like, I don't think the Steelers have an answer, and they may not until next year.
And they're cool with that.
Yeah, they make it work.
I doubted them last offseason. I think one of my takes was that they were finally going to go below 500, and then they started the year like 10-1. So I just have supreme faith that they'll figure it out regardless of who the QB is.
And that's where it's just like the quarterback carousel. It's like how much of this actually relates to them. Like it's just the way they go about playing football. It's a completely different brand of football. It's kind of like what I like and appreciate about what Steichen's doing in Indianapolis. It's against the grain. Like you could run the ball 40 times a game and probably make it work, based on your personnel. So just cool wrinkles to see with some of this. I think another example could be, and this isn't a crowded quarterback room, and it may turn that way in the training camp, but we saw many, many years ago, back in 2012, Matt Flynn got signed by the Seattle Seahawks. He was their quarterback acquisition. And it was funny, a year before that, I was a big fan of Kevin Kolb with the Philadelphia Eagles, who had shown up in times when Michael Vick had kind of missed time. So I like that trajectory of, hey, you sign a veteran, maybe see if he's the next Jake Delhomme or Kurt Warner or this guy off the bench that like really can put it together. And then they drafted Russell Wilson in the third round. And it didn't even matter the money they handed to Matt Flynn because Russell Wilson ended up becoming the starter. And so in Seattle, you have the Sam Darnold, Jalen Milroe effect. I don't know if we're going to see a deja vu element. You did have John Schneider there as the GM for both times. And then I think another one, and this is really reaching, but the San Francisco 49ers, the rumors were Kyle Shanahan moved up the 3 for Mac Jones and then got pressured into taking Trey Lance. Well, now Mac Jones is on the roster. You paid Brock Purdy his big contract. Obviously, with the money towards Purdy, he's the incumbent starter. I think especially with the guarantees, he's probably going to be his starter a couple of years. But say he gets injured in the next year or two, Mac Jones comes in and plays phenomenally. Is there a change at quarterback? Is that in the cards for the 49ers?
I think you are overlooking a big part of this 49ers QB battle. And it's not Purdy, and it's not Mac Jones. It is 7th round pick Curtis Rourke out of Indiana. Can you tell me who won the last quarterback battle or had the opportunity for the 49ers? It happened to be a 7th round pick named Brock Purdy. And if you recall, Indiana started the year, I believe, 10-0, 9-0, en route to a playoff berth that they probably shouldn't have had, but because of their record, they got in. They like 10-2. You deserve it, right? According to your record, they got smoked in the first round, but he led them to what's, I think it has to be Indiana's best season of all time, at least best regular season. The had the coach saying, "Google me, Kurt Signetti." But what if he Brock Purdy's Brock Purdy and Mac Jones? Because if you remember, it wasn't. Purdy was the number 2. Purdy was the 3. It was Trey Lance, Jimmy G, and then Purdy. What if we have the incumbent guy, Purdy? We have the backup, Mac Jones, but it's the 7th rounder who makes it interesting. What if that's the case?
The time you're talking about with Brock Purdy, pretty much taking over was because Jimmy G and Trey Lance both got hurt. Like they were going to be the 1-2 guy, but then they both went out, and Brock Purdy, everybody saw in training camp, was really good, arguably better than the other two, comes in and performs admirably well and has since then. But I think him being a smaller guy, him having an injury history, him then getting all this guaranteed money, it does make you a little bit concerned. But it seems like the 49ers get these journeyman backups. They had Sam Darnold a couple of years ago. They obviously did just sign Mac Jones. It will be interesting to see that if one of these guys ends up seeing a game or two of action because of an injury, like, how do they perform? Does that cause some drama in the media? I definitely don't think it's a situation of a training camp battle, but like you said, fun to monitor. You never know. 7th rounder could overtake them both with some injuries and look the part, and then somehow Brock Purdy's traded next offseason. So I'm not going to say there's a zero chance of that happening. I think there is a small percentage likelihood that could be the outcome.
We will have to see. Like, I had thought that they were pivoting away from Purdy with trying to create room and then getting other players in there, but they stuck and paid him. And now, regardless of how he performs, they're going to have to pay the price. I'm looking at his guarantee structure right now, $182.55 million guaranteed. Even if you adjust for inflation over the last decade or so of like the big QB booms, second most guaranteed money only to Joe Burrow, who I think we can both agree is at least a couple echelons of a better quarterback ahead of Brock Purdy. I think we're in the takes territory. I don't really have anything else left. Do you?
If I can, hold on. Is it not sharing? I thought I was sharing here. Hold on. Trying to share the graphic that you were just talking about with the guaranteed money. Yeah. So San Francisco Data Niners. It's a really fun play on the San Francisco 49ers. But I was trying to just show the screen and show where the guaranteed contract structure works, because it is interesting to see I think, oh, there we go. Finally up. Where the guarantees are, he's, yes, like you said, right behind Joe Burrow, but the annual average value, when you look at it from an inflated standpoint, it puts him in a tier of a Matthew Stafford, maybe a Tua or a Goff. And so with those quarterbacks, and we were having this conversation before we hopped on air, but I think his play, at least up until this point, has proven to be in their territory. He's able to make some of these more impressive intermediate throws. I think his quick acceleration allows him to scramble and make plays that necessarily other quarterbacks can't. And so there are elements to his game that I think do elevate the roster. Is that worth 53 million? And obviously, is that worth the guaranteed money that was attached to it? I think we can argue that he is in that tier of quarterbacks.
If we argue that he's in that tier, and I would say he's at the bottom of the Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff group right there. You could throw Kyler in there as well. If he is in that tier, and we could shoehorn him in there. Purdy's what, like the 15th best QB. If you compare that group to and their guaranteed money to what Purdy's guarantees are, that to me is like the stark difference there, because even if the AAV, average annual value, is similar, at the end of the day, you're not guaranteed as much with Tua if he gets injured again. You're not guaranteed as much with Goff, who we both know can't be like a high-level elevator like Josh Allen or Mahomes or Lamar Jackson can. So, like, that's what sticks out to me is even if you want to bucket him in that grouping, the guaranteed money that the 49ers are going to have to owe Brock Purdy probably until 2029, because you know how restructures work and pushing it down the line. That's what sticks out to me compared to Goff, Tagovailoa, Jordan Love, like that kind of thing.
So let me pose this scenario, because you brought up Tua's health. Goff and Stafford are well past that second contract. They're much later in their careers. You have a higher injury risk. They could just fall off a cliff for any reason. I think with Brock Purdy going into that second extension, you like getting him at that number that you got him at. And I think really to make sure that he wasn't asking for Dak money where he's approaching 60 million, they go, hey, we'll give you this lower number and we'll like pretty much in essence, like pretty much guarantee everything. And I think from a cap standpoint, when you see that constantly growing the way it is, and you see the general sphere he's in, if you were able to save money from an annual average value standpoint, so you don't have to restructure and convert some of this money to signing bonuses in the future, I think that was smart. But again, to your point, if from a talent perspective, he's towards the bottom of this tier, the guaranteed money structure, despite the annual average value, is a lot. And it does become worrisome, because you go back to another quarterback that they signed a lot of money to that they drafted in Colin Kaepernick, obviously a different general manager, but they did not guarantee near this amount of money. They were able to get out of that contract when they wanted to. And that doesn't seem to be the case with this one. Obviously, it's not going to strap you like Deshaun Watson's, but something to monitor moving forward.
I think the final thing I'll say there, and you do bring up a good point. When you look at, or at least when I look at quarterback contracts, aside from Mahomes and Josh Allen, because their contracts are a bit different, right? They have such long-term contracts that they're kind of inelastic to the rest of how the market works, because they'll just continue to restructure. Mahomes, in probably like 3 years, will sign another 10-year deal or something like that, and he'll be on a deal till he retires. Josh Allen's kind of similar, but his is I think 6-year deals instead of 10. With quarterback contracts, I find AAV, average annual value, to be kind of not the full picture, because with quarterbacks, more than any position, you constantly restructure. And if you have a franchise guy, part of that contract is going to be pushed into the next one. So that's why I'm so focused on the guarantee part of it, because when you compare this, and obviously this is adjusted for inflation, right? Like Josh Allen's guarantees are higher than this right now. Who's somebody that signed a while back? Lamar Jackson's guarantees are higher.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago.
Herbert, Trevor Lawrence's as well.
Season. Yep.
The AAV looks good, but when you compare it to the guarantees, it's just Purdy's talent level doesn't match up with some of the guarantees that Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Lamar, all these better QBs are going to have in their contracts.
The only thing I will say is this is all guaranteed up front. A lot of those other contracts, once you hit year 2 or 3, you have those guarantees that then get locked in. So it's like built-in guaranteed structures. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit different. We could go back and forth on this. At the end of the day, it's good that the 49ers got Deebo Samuel off the roster. They've been doing some cleaning house in terms of the defense and getting leaner and getting rookie contracts on that defensive line while still having their star Nick Bosa. They extended Fred Warner, one of the better linebackers in football. They're doing things that make sense for the brand of football that they want to play. Talked about it on Tuesday. They have an easier schedule, could easily rattle off 10 to 12 wins. And so I don't think this is going to be an issue this year. It's just moving forward. Do Purdy's injuries start becoming a reoccurring theme? Do the 49ers lack this talent gap now that Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, like George Kittle, even with him getting older, like they aren't giving you the same production they gave you a couple of years ago? Does that impact what we see on the field from this offense, or are they able to like morph and evolve? So with that, I think we're wrapped up with kind of the topic today of crowded quarterback rooms, and that leads us into Purrfect Takes. And so with you, regarding these teams, regarding these quarterback rooms, what's a take that you have that may seem a little hot or controversial?
So for the 4 main crowded rooms we talked about, those are the Cleveland Browns, New York Giants, New Orleans Saints, and Indianapolis Colts. We talked about presumed starters. For the Browns, it was Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco. We can throw either of those there. The Giants, it's confirmed to be Russell Wilson. The Saints, we can pretty much confirm it's going to be Tyler Shuck. And I would imagine that Anthony Richardson ends up winning that battle there. My take is that for all 4 of those teams, the 4 starters that I just mentioned, none of them will finish the year as the starter. So I think that the Browns at some point are going to start one of the rookies with Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders, that they're going to finish the season. The Giants, I would hope that Jackson Dart finishes the season for them. Otherwise, then they're like 11-5 or something, and they're in the playoffs with Russ.
If you're 8-9, 9-8 with Russ, or like heading down the stretch where you could get that 7 seed, I could see them not diverging.
Maybe. But as far as my take goes, Dart or Jameis Winston might be the starter because it's just not the starter. The Saints, I don't think Shuck's going to show enough, and I think Rattler and Haener are bad enough to where they're not going to be put out of draft position. So Shuck won't be the starter. And for the Colts, I think between Richardson's injury history, between late last year, the whole getting benched situation, I think that they brought in Daniel Jones for a reason. I think Riley Leonard's there for a reason. Because it's the same system, similar strengths. I think we see one of those guys finish the year for the Colts. So Pickett, Flacco, Russ, Shuck, and Richardson will not be the starters at the end of the year.
I think that's a good take that you can easily see with these quarterback rooms with so many questions that 1 or 2 weeks of bad performance could easily have you on the bench. We saw it here in Carolina firsthand last year. Definitely something that's very feasible and plausible. Mine is going to be, and I tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago when Derek Carr announced his retirement, but I really do think Tyler Shuck is about to become Will Levis 2.0. I don't think the environment is conducive enough. This isn't like the Philadelphia Eagles. He's not like Dak Prescott walking in with the 2016 Cowboys where you have a running back 1, good wide receiver options, and arguably the best offensive line of the entire decade. That's just not what Tyler Shuck has. Yeah. He doesn't have the ability to ease in and allow the pace of the game to slow down for him. And because of that, and because of how he reacts to pressure, he's going to have 2 or 3 of these moments each game where it's just like, what are you doing? Despite how good he could be slinging the ball the rest of the game. And I think that is going to put the Saints in the driver's seat for the first overall pick. I do think they have the first overall pick next year. It's hard to see with like the injury of this team or the health of this team that they're like, oh, they're going to stay healthy, going to find ways to win games. Like we saw Brandon Staley and Kellen Moore with Justin Herbert, and why halfway through the year it didn't look half bad. As soon as they started losing pieces, a team was having 60-point burgers hung on them by division rivals, which we talked about this on Tuesday with the schedule release that's happening after the bye. Your Carolina Panthers are going to absolutely murder them in New Orleans. But besides the point, they're going to have the first overall pick in this year's I guess next year's upcoming draft.
Well, I hope for our sake that that's not true. For your sake, I hope it's true. I see what you did there. It's like a win-win scenario for you with that take. I respect what you're doing. But yeah, I like it. Good talk about the crowded QB rooms. I think next week we'll have it won't be regarding QBs, but it'll be regarding different rooms and positions around the league. We might talk about some of the best positions, some of the like best all-time position groups and stuff like that. But we'll have to stay tuned till next week. But till then, follow us on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, wherever you get your content. And yeah, keep pounding.